The first thing I smelled when I opened my front door was the metallic scent of gun oil and my wife's expensive perfume. Sarah was sitting at our kitchen table, her hands shaking so violently the china rattled, while a man I'd never seen before calmly took apart a Glock 17 on our butcher block. He didn't look up. He just said I had until dawn to sign a confession for a $50 million theft I didn't commit, or I'd never see Sarah breathe again. I had a drive in my pocket that could prove my innocence, but I just realized it was a tracking beacon, and I had led them straight to my house. The FBI is raiding this address in exactly 48 hours. My boss wants me dead. My lawyer is the one who set me up. And the only way to save my family is to become the monster everyone already thinks I am. Let me take you back to where this began. The cursor blinked against a sea of digital ink. Arthur Miller gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, the wood grain biting into his palms. On the monitor, a $50 million wire transfer glowed with the cold brilliance of a funeral shroud. His own digital signature sat at the bottom, a perfect mathematical lie. The timestamp placed the transaction during his daughter's piano recital. Yet the data insisted his fingers had tapped the keys. The air in the executive suite grew thin, smelling of expensive ozone and stale espresso. Arthur's chest tightened as he traced the routing numbers. They led through a labyrinth of shell companies anchored in the Caymans, a trail designed to end at his front door. Federal money laundering. The words tasted like copper in his mouth. Julian Sterling's office sat across the hall, a glass cage of ambition. Through the tinted partition, Arthur watched his partner swirl a tumbler of amber liquid. Julian didn't glance up. He didn't have to. The setup was surgical. By tomorrow, the board would see a rogue CFO, and Sterling Global would remain pristine, shielded by Arthur's ruin. Arthur's hand shook as he reached for the mouse. He needed the basement archives. He needed the raw records before the automated backup purged the truth. A bead of sweat trickled down his neck, soaking into his silk collar. He shoved his chair away, the wheels screeching against the polished floor like a trapped animal. Every security camera in the hallway now resembled an eye, recording his descent toward a trap he hadn't seen until the steel snapped shut. 1, 2, 3, 4. Arthur counted the stairs in a rhythmic whisper as he descended into the bowels of the building. The basement archives were a tomb of paper and humming machines. The air here was cooler, heavy with the scent of old dust and the static charge of thousands of miles of wiring. He reached the heavy steel door of the archive room and swiped his badge. The lock clicked with a sound like a bone snapping. Inside, the rows of metal cabinets stretched into the gloom. He moved toward the back, where the primary data storage units lived, massive black towers that exhaled a constant, low-pitched roar. He found the terminal, his fingers dancing over the keys with desperate precision. He wasn't just looking for the transfer, he was looking for the ghost in the machine, the trace of who had actually logged in using his name. "It's a long way down, Arthur." The voice was smooth, like expensive scotch, and it came from the shadows behind the cooling fans. Julian Sterling stepped into the light. He looked immaculate, his suit without a single wrinkle, his posture as rigid as a tombstone. He crossed his legs, and for a moment, the hem of his trousers rose to reveal a flash of crimson, the red silk socks. The blood signal. "I've been watching the logs," Julian said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "You're looking for something that doesn't exist. The record says you did it. The board says you did it. Even the feds will say you did it." Arthur stood his ground, his back against the cold metal of the storage tower. "The signature is a fake, Julian. I was at my daughter's recital. I have the program. I have witnesses." Julian stepped closer. The smell of his cologne, something sharp and metallic, filling the narrow aisle. Witnesses can be mistaken. Programs can be printed. But the data? The data is absolute. You're the architect of this firm's success, Arthur. It's only fitting you become the architect of its survival. Julian reached out and touched Arthur's shoulder, a gesture of false intimacy that made Arthur's skin crawl. "Sign the confession I've prepared. I'll make sure Sarah and the kids are taken care of. If you fight this, I'll bury you so deep the light won't find you for 20 years. Your reputation, your family, your house in Oak Park. It all goes up in smoke by Monday morning." Arthur felt the walls closing in. The rhythmic humming of the servers felt like it was vibrating inside his skull. He looked at Julian's unblinking eyes and realized there was no mercy there. Only the cold calculation of a man who had already decided Arthur was a necessary sacrifice. "I need to think," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. "You have until dawn," Julian replied, turning on his heel. "Don't bother trying to leave through the front. The cameras are very fond of you tonight." Arthur waited until the sound of Julian's footsteps faded. He turned back to the terminal, his heart hammering against his ribs like a bird in a cage. He couldn't stay here, but he couldn't leave empty-handed. He needed an ally. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a burner phone, dialing a number he had memorized weeks ago. "Kevin? It's Arthur. I'm in the basement. I need the logs, the real ones." A few minutes later, a shadow detached itself from the far end of the archive room. Kevin Reed, the lead technician, approached with a nervous twitch in his left eyelid. He was clutching a small plastic case. Kevin's desk was always a mess of sugar packets, and even now, Arthur could see the corner of a yellow Splenda packet peeking out of his shirt pocket. "I shouldn't be doing this, Arthur," Kevin whispered, his voice shaking. "If Julian finds out, I'm dead. We're both dead. Julian is already trying to kill me, Kevin. This is the only way out." Arthur felt a surge of hope. Kevin had been with the firm for 5 years. He was a quiet man, a man who survived by being invisible. But he had always been fair to Arthur. He was the only one with the clearance to bypass the firm's internal blocks. "I've got it right here," Kevin said, holding out a small silver thumb drive. "I pulled the raw traffic data from the main hub. It shows the login originated from Julian's suite, not yours. It's the smoking gun, Arthur. Everything you need to clear your name." Arthur reached for the drive, his fingers grazing Kevin's cold hand. "Thank you, Kevin. I won't forget this." Kevin nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Just get out of here. Use the freight elevator. I've looped the security feed for the next 90 seconds. Go." Arthur turned and sprinted toward the back of the room, the silver drive clutched in his palm like a holy relic. He could feel the weight of his problems lifting. With this data, he could go to the authorities. He could protect Sarah. He could end Julian's reign of terror. He reached the freight elevator, the heavy metal doors sliding open with a groan. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the garage. As the elevator began its slow, jerking ascent, Arthur looked down at the drive. It felt solid. It felt real. He had outsmarted them. He had found the one person Julian couldn't buy. He leaned his head against the vibrating wall of the elevator and closed his eyes, a single sob of relief escaping his throat. The nightmare was almost over. The elevator doors opened into the dimly lit parking garage. Arthur stepped out, his eyes scanning the rows of luxury cars. His Volvo was parked in Section 4G. He moved quickly, his shoes echoing against the concrete. He reached the car, fumbled with his keys, and slid into the driver's seat. He immediately plugged the drive into his laptop, needing to see the files for himself. The screen flickered to life. A progress bar appeared, accessing external drive. Arthur's brow furrowed. The progress bar didn't stop at 100%. It vanished, replaced by a black screen with a single line of red text. Initiating system wipe. What? Arthur whispered, his fingers flying over the keys. No. The laptop shrieked, a high-pitched electronic scream that set his teeth on edge. The smell of scorched plastic began to fill the car. He tried to pull the drive out, but it was hot, burning his fingertips. He yanked it free, but the screen stayed black. Then, a map appeared on his dashboard display, a map of his own car's location, with a bright red pulsing dot. GPS tracking active. Arthur looked up. In the rearview mirror, he saw the headlights of a black SUV ignite at the far end of the garage. Then another. The truth hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. Kevin hadn't given him the logs. Kevin had given him a Trojan horse. The nervous IT guy was Julian's most effective weapon. The drive wasn't a smoking gun, it was a homing beacon. By taking it, Arthur had given them the legal right to claim he was stealing proprietary data, and he had given them a way to follow him wherever he went. He slammed the car into reverse, the tires screaming against the oil-slicked concrete. He had thought he was being smart, but he had walked right into the teeth of the trap. He wasn't the hunter. He was just a fox running straight into the hounds. Arthur tore out of the parking garage, the steering wheel vibrating under his white-knuckled grip. The two black SUVs were close behind, their headlights reflecting in his mirrors like the eyes of a predator. He didn't head for the highway. He knew they'd box him in there. Instead, he veered into the side streets of downtown Chicago, weaving through the late-night traffic of delivery trucks and taxis. He needed to get home. He needed to get Sarah. The drive to Oak Park felt like an eternity. Every red light was a threat, every shadow a potential ambush. He kept checking the dashboard, but the GPS alert had vanished, meaning the virus had finished its work. It had likely wiped his phone, his contacts, and his car's navigation system. He was flying blind. When he finally turned onto his street, the sight made his blood run cold. His house, a beautiful Victorian with a wraparound porch, was bathed in the harsh, artificial glow of floodlights. Two men in dark suits were standing on his lawn, their silhouettes sharp against the manicured grass. A black sedan was idling in his driveway. Arthur parked 3 houses down and ran through the neighbor's yard, his heart hammering. He stayed low, moving past the scent of cinnamon-flavored mulch and the rhythmic tinkling of wind chimes. He reached his back porch and slipped inside through the kitchen door. The house smelled of Sarah's lavender candles, but the atmosphere was fractured. He heard voices coming from the living room, low, intimidating, and practiced. "We just want to ensure your husband's safety, Mrs. Miller," a man was saying. "There have been irregularities at the firm. Dangerous people are involved." Arthur crept to the hallway. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, her hair in a messy ponytail, her hands shaking as she held a mug of tea. She looked small, cornered by 2 men who loomed over her like gargoyles. "I told you, I don't know where he is," Sarah whispered. "Please, it's late. You're scaring me." "We're sorry for the intrusion, really," the lead man said, his voice dripping with false empathy. "But until Arthur comes in, we have to remain here for your protection. Julian's orders." Arthur felt a wave of fury. He stepped into the light of the living room. "Get out of my house." The 2 men turned. They didn't look surprised. They looked bored. The lead one, a man with a thick neck and a scar running through his eyebrow, smiled. "There he is. We were just telling your wife how much we've missed you, Arthur." "Sarah, go upstairs," Arthur commanded, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "Arthur, what's happening?" she cried, rising from the sofa. "Go, Sarah, now." She fled, her footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs. Arthur turned back to the men. "You have no right to be here. This is private property." "Julian thinks otherwise," the man said, stepping forward. "He's worried you might do something rash, like try to leave town with stolen data." The man reached into his jacket, and for a second, Arthur thought he was pulling a gun. Instead, he produced a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the coffee table. "That's the confession," the man said. "Sign it, and we leave. Your wife stays safe. Your kids keep their college funds. Don't sign it. And the FBI gets an anonymous tip about the $50 million in 10 minutes. And trust me, Arthur, the feds aren't as polite as we are." The wall clock ticked, a heavy, resonant sound that seemed to slow down time. Arthur looked at the envelope. He looked at the shadows of the men on his wall. He felt the weight of the last 20 years of his life, the late nights, the meticulous records, the pride he took in being a good man. All of it being crushed into a single dirty piece of paper. "I need to speak to my lawyer," Arthur said. The man laughed. "You do that. But the clock is ticking, Arthur. Dawn is coming fast." The men didn't leave the house. They simply moved to the porch, visible through the glass of the front door. Arthur ran upstairs to find Sarah. She was in their bedroom, huddled by the window, watching the street. "They're everywhere, Arthur," she sobbed. "I saw them behind the garage. Who are these people?" "It's Julian," Arthur said, taking her hands. Her skin was ice cold. "He's framing me for something big. I have to get you out of here." "How?" "They've blocked the driveway." Arthur looked around the room. His eyes landed on a framed photo of them on their wedding day. He remembered the hidden compartment he'd built behind the wall paneling years ago for their passports and emergency cash. He moved to the closet, pulled back the clothes, and pressed a hidden latch. "Take this," he said, handing her a small encrypted drive he'd kept as a personal backup of his own work logs. "It's not the server data, but it's my personal ledger. It proves I wasn't at the office when the transfers happened. I need you to take the kids and go to your sister's in Indiana. Don't use the highway. Take the back roads." "What about you?" "I'm going to draw them away. If they follow me, they aren't following you." He led her to the back staircase that descended into the mudroom. They moved in silence, Arthur counting the steps in his head. 1, 2, 3. They reached the back door. He kissed her forehead, the scent of her hair the only thing that felt real in the nightmare. "I love you. Go." He watched her disappear into the shadows of the backyard, heading toward the neighbor's fence. He waited until he heard the distant start of her old SUV 2 streets over. Then he walked to the front door, grabbed his car keys, and stepped out onto the porch. The man with the scar looked up. "Change your mind?" "I'm going for a drive," Arthur said. He didn't wait for an answer. He lunged for his car. The men scrambled, shouting into their radios. Arthur slammed the Volvo into gear and floored it, fishtailing across his pristine lawn and roaring onto the street. The pursuit was instantaneous. The 2 black SUVs lurched from the curb, their engines roaring like wounded bulls. Arthur pushed the Volvo to its limit, the suburban streets of Oak Park blurring into a smear of yellow streetlights and dark trees. He headed toward the industrial district, a wasteland of warehouses and half-finished construction projects. He knew the layout of the new Sterling and Vance high-rise site. He'd audited the construction costs for 3 years. It was a maze of steel and concrete, perfect for a man who knew every inch of the blueprints. He veered the car through a gap in the chain-link fence, the metal screeching against his fenders. He drove deep into the site, past stacks of lumber and skeletal cranes, before slamming on the brakes near the base of the unfinished tower. He jumped out and ran into the dark maw of the building. Behind him, the SUVs screeched to a halt. Doors slammed, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel. "Miller, there's nowhere to go." Arthur didn't answer. He climbed. The stairs were nothing but raw concrete and rebar. 12, 13, 14. He reached the 3rd floor, the air smelling of wet cement and sawdust. He found what he was looking for, an emergency equipment locker. He smashed the glass with his elbow and grabbed a flare gun. He heard them below him. They were moving with tactical precision, splitting up to flank him. He retreated further into the shadows of the floor, hiding behind a massive concrete pillar. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, reflecting off the dust motes in the air. "We know you're here, Arthur. Just give us the drive and sign the papers. It doesn't have to end like this." The lead man, the one with the scar, stepped into the open area. He was holding a heavy flashlight in one hand and a radio in the other. He looked confident, his movements slow and deliberate. Arthur waited. He waited until the man was exactly 10 feet away. He stepped out from behind the pillar and leveled the flare gun. "Stay back." The man laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "What are you going to do with that, Arthur? You're an accountant. You don't have the stomach for this." "You don't know what I have the stomach for," Arthur whispered. He pulled the trigger. The flare erupted with a deafening whoosh, a ball of brilliant, white-hot magnesium screaming through the air. It hit the man square in the chest, showering him in sparks. He screamed, dropping his flashlight and stumbling backward into the darkness. Arthur didn't wait to see the results. He turned and ran for the freight elevator, a temporary cage of mesh and steel used by the workers. He slammed the gate shut and hit the lever. The elevator groaned, its motors straining as it began to descend. He looked up through the mesh. The second man was at the edge of the floor, firing a handgun. The bullet sparked off the steel frame of the elevator, the sound like hammers hitting an anvil. Arthur ducked, the smell of ozone and burnt hair filling his nostrils. The elevator hit the ground floor with a bone-jarring thud. Arthur rolled out, scrambled to his feet, and disappeared into the dense woods that bordered the construction site. He ran until his lungs burned, until the sounds of the pursuit were replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city. He found a payphone outside a closed gas station on the edge of the city. His hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped the coins. He dialed Robert Hayes, his lawyer and a friend of 20 years. Robert had been the best man at his wedding. He was the only person left who could help. "Robert, it's Arthur. They're hunting me. I'm at the corner of 5th and Industrial. Please, I need a way out." "Arthur? My God, man, where have you been?" "Julian is telling everyone you've had a breakdown. Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. We'll go to the feds together. I'll protect you." Arthur leaned his head against the cold glass of the phone booth. "Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Just hold on, Arthur. I'm 10 minutes away." Arthur sat on a rusted bench, the cold night air biting through his thin shirt. He watched the road, his heart swelling with a desperate hope. Robert was a shark in the courtroom, a man who knew every trick in the book. If anyone could dismantle Julian's frame-up, it was him. A silver Lexus pulled into the gas station lot 10 minutes later. Robert Hayes stepped out, looking polished even at 3 in the morning. He walked toward Arthur, his hand extended. "Arthur, thank God you're okay." Robert reached out and gripped Arthur's shoulder, his other hand moving to Arthur's arm. It was a gesture of comfort, a familiar touch. But then Arthur heard it. Snap, pop, crack. Robert was cracking his knuckles, thumb to pinky. The rhythmic sequence echoed in the quiet lot like a series of small gunshots. Arthur froze. He remembered the jokes they used to make about Robert's death crack. He only did it when he was about to deliver a killing blow in a deposition. He only did it when he was lying. Arthur looked into Robert's eyes. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, professional detachment. "You should have signed the papers, Arthur," Robert said softly. "It would have been so much cleaner." "Robert, what are you saying?" "Julian didn't just pick you because you were meticulous. He picked you because I told him you were the easiest to break. I've been managing Julian's off-book interests for 5 years, Arthur. Who do you think set up the Cayman accounts? Who do you think spoofed your signature?" Arthur felt the world tilt. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that for a moment he couldn't breathe. His last lifeline hadn't just snapped. It had turned into a noose. "How much?" Arthur whispered. "How much was I worth to you?" $2 million on the back end," Robert said, checking his watch. "Plus a seat on the board. Don't look at me like that. It's just business." "You were always too rigid, Arthur. Too obsessed with the rules. In this world, the rules are just suggestions for the people who can't afford to break them." Blue and red lights appeared at the edge of the road. Police sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. "That's your escort," Robert said, stepping back and smoothing his tie. "I told them you were armed and delusional. If you're smart, you'll put your hands up and hope they don't have itchy trigger fingers. But knowing Julian, he's already paid for the unfortunate accident during your arrest." Robert turned and walked back to his Lexus, leaving Arthur standing alone under the flickering fluorescent light of the gas station. Arthur looked at the approaching lights, then at the dark woods behind him. He wasn't going to die in a gas station parking lot. He lunged for an abandoned delivery truck parked near the garage, an old rusted Ford with a "for sale" sign in the window. He smashed the driver's side window with a rock, ignored the glass biting into his skin, and reached under the dash. He'd learned to hotwire cars from a client years ago, a repo man who had paid his fees in trade secrets. He stripped the wires, sparks flying as he touched them together. The engine groaned, coughed, and then roared to life with a cloud of black smoke. He slammed it into gear just as the first police cruiser pulled into the lot. He drove like a madman, the old truck shaking as he pushed it over 60. He retreated to the only place he had left, a derelict motel on the outskirts of the city called the Sleepy Owl. It was a place where people went to disappear, a cluster of low-slung buildings with peeling paint and a neon sign that hummed with a dying light. He paid the clerk in cash, the emergency money from the wall compartment, and locked himself in room 14. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The radiator hissed, a high-pitched, rhythmic whistle that sounded like a human tea kettle about to boil over. He sat on the edge of the bed, his laptop open on his knees. He had one thing left, the drive Sarah had taken. He'd managed to grab it back from her before she left. Realizing he couldn't let her carry the target, he bypassed the virus Kevin had planted by booting the laptop in a secure, sandboxed mode he designed for the firm's audits. His fingers flew over the keys, his mind a blur of numbers and code. He broke through the encryption, and suddenly, the screen was flooded with data. It wasn't just the server logs. It was a cache of private emails between Julian Sterling and Eleanor Vance, the CFO. Arthur's eyes widened as he read. They weren't just laundering money for the firm, they were stealing from each other. Eleanor had been skimming off the top of Julian's secret accounts for years, hiding her tracks within the very fraud Julian had designed. The fraud within the fraud, Arthur whispered. He felt a surge of cold, hard clarity. He had the map, he had the names. But then, he found the final document, a PDF labeled Miller_Benefit_Trust. He opened it, expecting to see the college funds Julian had promised. Instead, he saw a life insurance policy. A $50 million policy taken out by the firm on Arthur Miller's life. The beneficiary wasn't Sarah. It was Sterling and Vance, and there was a rider. The policy only paid out in full if the death was ruled a suicide following a criminal investigation. Julian didn't want Arthur in prison. He wanted Arthur dead. The wellness check wasn't a capture mission. It was an execution. A shadow crossed the moth-eaten curtain of his window. Arthur froze. He heard the crunch of gravel outside, then a heavy thud against the door. The wood splintered. Julian Sterling stepped into the room, his face twisted in a mask of predatory rage. He wasn't wearing a suit now. He was in a dark raincoat, and in his hand, he held a heavy iron tire iron. "You've been a very difficult man to kill, Arthur," Julian said, his voice a low growl. He lunged. The first blow caught Arthur in the shoulder, the sound of the iron hitting bone like a sickening crack. Arthur screamed, falling back against the radiator. The heat seared his skin, but the pain in his shoulder was worse. Julian swung again. Arthur rolled, the tire iron smashing into the headboard of the bed, sending splinters of cheap wood flying. "You think you're so smart with your numbers," Julian shouted, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You're nothing. You're a pencil pusher. My father died because of people like you. People who cared more about the ledger than the man." Julian grabbed Arthur by the collar and slammed him against the wall. He raised the tire iron for a final blow. Arthur felt the cold air from the broken door, the rain-slicked parking lot waiting for his body. But Arthur's hand was already in his pocket. He pulled out the small, high-voltage taser he'd taken from the construction site's security locker. He jammed it into Julian's neck and pulled the trigger. The sound was a sharp, blue crackle. Julian's body went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head. He let out a choked gasp and collapsed onto the floor, the tire iron clattering away. Arthur stood over him, gasping for breath, his shoulders screaming in pain. He looked at the unconscious man who had tried to destroy his life. He felt no pity. He felt nothing but a cold, hard resolve. He reached into Julian's pocket and took his car keys. He grabbed his laptop and stepped out into the rain. Julian's luxury sedan was idling in the parking lot. Arthur climbed in, the leather seats smelling of expensive wood and ambition. He saw Julian's phone on the console. It was buzzing. A message appeared on the screen. "Wellness check coordinated with District 4. Target to be executed at 0500. Make it look like a struggle." Asterisk. Arthur looked at the clock on the dashboard. 4:15 a.m. He didn't head for the police station. He didn't head for the FBI. He headed for the Field Museum. The firm's annual gala was in full swing. It was a cathedral of wealth, white marble, towering dinosaur skeletons, and men in tuxedos who moved like sharks in silk. Arthur moved through the shadows of the museum, his catering uniform stolen from a delivery van, smelling of industrial floor wax. He used the service elevator codes he'd audited a year ago. 4, 3, 2, 1. He reached the founder's room, a place of heavy velvet drapes, and the suffocating scent of mothballs. Inside, Eleanor Vance was standing by a massive oil painting, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked regal, her iron-gray hair perfectly coiffed. She was talking to a group of investors, her voice like cracking ice. Arthur stepped out of the shadows. "The audit is complete, Eleanor." The room went silent. The investors stared at the disheveled man in the stained catering jacket. Eleanor's face didn't change, but her hand tightened around her glass. "Arthur, you're early for your appointment with the police." "The police are busy," Arthur said, holding up his laptop. "They're busy reading the emails I just sent to the federal prosecutor, the ones where you describe exactly how you've been stealing from Julian for the last 3 years. Eleanor's mask slipped. A flicker of genuine terror crossed her eyes. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I have the ledger, Eleanor. I have the routing numbers. I have the triple wash you used to clean the money before it hit your offshore accounts. Julian didn't know, but he does now. I sent him a copy too." The doors to the founder's room burst open. 2 federal agents stepped inside, followed by a phalanx of police. They didn't look at Arthur. They walked straight to Eleanor Vance. "Eleanor Vance, you're under arrest for federal money laundering and conspiracy to commit murder." Arthur watched as they led her away. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just looked at Arthur with a cold, dead stare. The look of a woman who had finally been found out. Arthur felt hollow. He had won. He had cleared his name. But as he watched the police tape being stretched across the founder's room, he realized what it had cost him. He returned to Oak Park at dawn. The sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across his lawn. Sarah was standing on the porch, her face pale in the early light. Arthur stopped at the edge of the driveway. He looked at her, and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't know what to say. He saw the way she looked at him, the fear, the uncertainty, the realization that the man standing before her wasn't the man she had married. He had used their tactics. He had lied. He had stolen. He had used violence. He had become a predator to survive the predators. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over," Arthur said. He walked to the back of the garage and started a small fire in a metal bin. He took the silver drive, the one that contained the truth and the lies, and tossed it into the flames. He watched as the plastic bubbled and melted, the physical evidence of his transformation turning to ash. He sat on his porch, the rhythmic tinkling of the wind chimes the only sound in the morning air. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He felt a cold, hard clarity he had never known before. He wasn't a victim anymore. He wasn't a man who followed the rules. He was the man who wrote them. He went inside and sat at his desk. He opened a new spreadsheet. He began to type, his fingers moving with the precision of a machine. 1, 2, 3. The world was a system, and Arthur Miller finally knew how to break it. The end. Do not proceed past this point.